death penalty not, he didn't avoid the death penalty because he was mentally ill. That wasn't the reason. Amnesty International recently came out with a report that estimates that at least 100 of the more than 1,000 people executed in the United States since 1992 were people with serious mental illnesses, including schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So mental illness wouldn't save his life. It wasn't because of gratitude to the family. I know 4 other families that have turned in loved ones for murder, and all 5 of our families went through death penalty trials. And in 2 cases, the family members have already witnessed the execution of their loved ones. So it wasn't personal gratitude to the Kaczynski family, like our thank you for doing a difficult good deed. My brother's alive today because he had incredibly good lawyers. I can guarantee you that none of the 1,000 plus people executed in America, or none of the 3,000 plus currently on death row in America had attorneys as gifted and experienced as the attorneys who defended my brother. We're not executing the people in this country who committed the worst crimes. In general, we're executing those who got the worst lawyers. And you know who they are. They're poor people. They're people with darker skin. Often they're people with mental illnesses who can't contribute to their own defense. So on the night that Ted got his plea bargain, 2 years later, in the midst of the trial, kind of with some public pressure, the prosecution finally offered a plea bargain, life without parole. Mom and I knew that we were never going to face that night, that nightmare we were dreading of the hands of the clock approaching midnight and our sitting together, holding hands, knowing that Ted was being executed. So there was some sense of relief, but believe me, there was no joy. For us, this wasn't about winning and losing. For this, it was just some relief to know. We weren't going to have to spend the next 10, 15, 20 years of our lives emotionally and physically consumed with the criminal justice process. But there was also, I think, a sense of trepidation, almost like, okay, we've been consumed for 2 years trying to save Ted's life. Now how are we going to live with this? How are we going to go on with this shadow in our lives? What's it going to be like for us from now on? When the telephone rang, and I kind of assumed it would be Linda or one of the lawyers or somebody from the media. Mom and I had actually rented an apartment in Sacramento, California for the duration of the trial. And the person on the other end of the line was a chaplain who worked for the Sacramento Police Department. And she was calling to let us know that one of the victim families wanted to meet with us. And I said, I'm happy to. I just don't know if Mom is up to it. So, I talked to Mom, I explained what the request was, and she said, oh, David, I think we should. It's the least we can do. So I told the chaplain, and a couple of hours later in the evening, she came and picked us up, drove us back to the courthouse. During that day, it had been buzzing with cameras and press conferences and activity. Now it was just this dark government building, and she took us in and led us down the hall, ushered us into a conference room. Mom and I walk in, and there in the room, there's 5 chairs arranged in a circle, and 2 of those chairs are vacant. They're waiting, obviously, for me and Mom. The other 3 chairs are filled with a widow whose husband had been killed by Ted, her sister, and her late husband's sister. So as Mom and I walk in the door, there's only one thing you could possibly say. It's like, we're sorry, we're so, so sorry. I could see Mom starting to cry a little bit. But I have to say, even to us, those words felt kind of hollow, because they were just words. They couldn't undo any of the damage that Ted has done. And we didn't know if we meant them sincerely. We didn't know if people would trust our sincerity. At any rate, we sit down, and the widow, kind of as a spokesperson for the family, she said that over the last few days of the trial, they had discussed this intensely between themselves, and they really thought that since there might never be another opportunity, they wanted to thank us personally for turning Ted in. And I was so struck by that. you know, if you think about it, this woman had learned this very day that the man who murdered her husband would most likely die a natural death in prison. And here she has, you know, the emotional energy, the perspective, the grace to, you know, to reach out to Ted's family and thank us. I was just so touched by that. You know, and we ended up kind of hugging each other and shedding tears together, and in some ways it felt like, you know, an incredibly healing experience to be able to understand that, you know, we each were impacted in a different way, but we were all suffering. And, you know, there were no sides to this tragedy. We were all losers. And Mom had something that she wanted them to know. And it probably wasn't the right time or the right place, but I think you could forgive her if you understand her need as a mother to communicate to them that her son wasn't a monster, that he wasn't evil, but that he was a very, very sick human being. And so Mom started talking about schizophrenia and mental illness, and, you know, talking about how, you know, Ted wasn't really himself, and he wasn't really in his right mind, and, you know, as I was looking into the faces of the three women, I realized they weren't very pleased. You know, Mom was trying to tell them one thing, but what they heard was somebody making excuses for the man who had murdered somebody they loved very, very much. And, you know, sure enough, at one point the widow just kind of broke in and interrupted Mom, and she said he knew what he was doing. And it seemed like, wow, you know, like a painfully tragic moment. Obviously, Mom stopped talking. You know, the room was kind of frozen in silence. And it almost felt like what we'd come for, this noble, humane sense of we want to reconcile, we want to recognize and acknowledge, almost seemed like, you know, it was a failure. It's like we'd come together from a far distance apart toward this other hurting family, and we wanted to kind of reach out to them, and they wanted to reach out to us, and yet we found that between us there was like this incredible abyss of pain and loss and trauma. You know, there's no bridge to the other side, no way for Mom to fully understand what they were living through, and no way for them to fully understand what Mom was living through. It almost like felt like we had failed. You know, we'd going to leave this room feeling such a distance between us. And at that point, Mom she kind of dropped her head. I saw her shoulders kind of hunch over, and she just said, I really wish you'd killed me instead of your husband. And I think that was quite honest from Mom. I mean, I don't think it was a ploy for sympathy, because I think she felt like such a failure in her life. All she ever wanted was for her children to be happy. And here, the result was that, you know, her son was miserable, had created untold misery for so many other people. You know, if she could have laid down her life to erase even some part of the misery that Ted had caused, I think she would have gladly done it. And she probably didn't feel any, you know, particular desire to live, honestly. But when Mom said that, I happened to be looking at the widow's face, and I saw that the hardness in it just kind of melt. And she was obviously struck with compassion, and she got out of her chair and knelt down, kind of right in front of Mom, put her hand up on Mom's shoulder. Mom's still kind of looking down. She looks her in the face and says, Mrs. Kaczynski, don't ever think we hold you responsible. Believe me, we don't think you're to blame at all. Never, ever blame yourself for any of this. You know, it was not, you know, if this was Hollywood, we'd be talking about, oh, some wonderful, you know, act of forgiveness or whatever it would be scripted differently. But, you know, I guess I came through this whole process feeling, you know, a sense of disillusionment about the system, about the criminal justice system. But I have to say, when I walked out of that room that day, and ever since, I've felt like an incredible sense of admiration for humanity, what people are capable of, people even under the worst of